I grew up terrified of Muslims, not because I'd ever met one, not because anyone had ever hurt me, but because every single screen I looked at told me I should be. I was 12 years old the first time I saw a news headline that used the word Muslim next to the word attack. I didn't even fully understand what the word Muslim meant at that point, but the fear was planted that day, and fear, once planted in a child's mind, grows without asking permission. It doesn't need watering, it doesn't need tending. It simply expands into every empty space you have. My mother changed the channel whenever anything about Islam came on the television. Not out of hatred, she would just say, "It's too much, sweetheart." My teachers never brought it up in class, my friends never talked about it, but the television never stopped talking about it. And it always said the same things, in the same tone, with the same urgency: dangerous, radical, extremist, terrorist. The words came attached to images of fire and rubble and chaos and grief. I absorbed all of it, every single frame of it. By the time I was a teenager, I had built a complete and detailed picture of what a Muslim was. And I had built it entirely without ever once opening my mouth to speak to one. Then I went to college. My roommate's name was Lina. She wore a hijab. When I walked into our shared dormitory room for the very first time and saw her there quietly unpacking her books with a small, warm smile, something cold moved through me. I didn't say anything. I smiled back. I introduced myself and shook her hand and said something polite about the room. But inside, every alarm I had ever been handed was going off at once, loud and insistent and certain. The first week, I barely spoke to her. I found reasons to study in the library. I ate my meals alone. I told myself I was just giving her space, giving us both space, being respectful. But the truth was simpler than that, and uglier. I was afraid of her, afraid of this quiet woman who made her bed neatly every morning and kept her side of the room impeccably organized and hummed softly to herself while she studied. And she was just there, laughing on the phone with her mother in a language I didn't know, making tea at midnight and leaving the kettle out in case I wanted some too, leaving small sticky notes on my desk that said things like, "You left your keys by the sink," or "I made extra pasta. It's in the fridge if you want it." She never asked for anything back. One night, I came back to the room at 2 in the morning, completely falling apart. A relationship had ended badly, an important exam had gone worse. Everything that semester had decided to collapse at exactly the same moment. I sat down on my bed and I started crying, the kind of crying that doesn't care who is watching. And I had forgotten in that raw and exhausted moment to be afraid of her. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say anything at all for a moment. She simply got up, filled the kettle, and made me tea. Then she sat down on the floor next to my bed, handed me the warm cup, and said very softly, "You don't have to talk. I'm just going to sit here with you." And she did. For 2 hours, she just sat there, quiet and present and steady, and something in me, something I hadn't even known was locked, began, very slowly, to crack open. I started watching her differently after that night. Not with fear, not with suspicion, with something that was much closer to wonder. She prayed 5 times a day, every day without exception. She would unroll a small mat, face a specific direction, and go completely still in a way I had never seen any human being go still. The first time I watched, I thought it looked unusual. The second time, I thought it looked intentional. By the third time, I thought it looked like the most deeply peaceful thing I had ever witnessed another person do. I asked her about it one afternoon. I didn't know how to ask without sounding rude, so I said the simplest version of what I wanted to know. "What does it feel like?" She was quiet for a long moment before she answered. Then she said, "Like putting down something very heavy. Like every single time I stand there, I remember that whatever is breaking me right now is so much smaller than what holds me together." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and turned those words over and over, looking at them from every angle. I started asking more questions after that, slowly, carefully, one at a time. She answered every single one with patience and precision and a gentleness that never once made me feel stupid for not knowing, never once made me feel guilty for the fear I was slowly, haltingly, beginning to confess to her. One evening, I finally said it directly. I told her that when I first walked into that room and saw her hijab, I had been afraid. I told her what years of television had taught me, what the films had shown me, what I had constructed in my mind before I'd ever said a single word to her. She didn't flinch. She looked at me for a long, careful moment, and then she said quietly, I know I've spent my whole life watching people look at me before they actually see me. And then she smiled. Not a bitter smile, a real one, full and warm. But you're here now, she said. You're asking. That is not nothing. I went home that summer and I began paying attention to the news in a way I never had before. Really paying attention, watching the language, watching the framing. I noticed that when a man with a Muslim name did something terrible, the word Muslim appeared in the headline immediately. Before anything else about him was established, it was woven into the first sentence as if it were the most important fact about him as a human being. But when someone else, with a different name, a different background, a different faith, did something equally terrible, the word Christian never appeared. The word white never appeared. Any religious or cultural identifier disappeared from the sentence entirely. He was simply a man, a troubled man, a lone individual, as if religion only ever became relevant when it attached itself to one specific group of people. I began noticing it in films too, the villain with the specific accent, the threatening crowd that always looked a particular way, the jokes that would have caused immediate and justified outrage if directed at almost any other community, but passed without comment because the target was Muslim. It was everywhere once I started looking for it. It had always been everywhere. I had simply never been looking because I had been too busy absorbing it as truth. I started reading, not articles designed to alarm me, books, history, academic scholarship, a careful translation of the Quran, which I read slowly, underlining passages that surprised me, returning to verses I didn't immediately understand. I read about the Islamic Golden Age, centuries during which the Muslim world was producing mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, and philosophers who were preserving and expanding human knowledge, while much of Europe sat in darkness. I read about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not from sources built around mockery or fear, but from careful historical accounts by scholars who approached the subject with honesty and rigor. I read about how he treated women, how he spoke of the poor, how he dealt with orphans and strangers and even his enemies. I read accounts of his character given by people who had spent their lives beside him, and accounts from those who had initially opposed him and were changed simply by witnessing how he lived. I read about a faith built on the absolute conviction that every single human soul, everyone without exception, carries inherent and inviolable dignity. None of it matched the picture I had been given. Not one piece, not one word. When I returned to school that autumn, I sat with Lina and told her everything I had spent the summer reading. She listened the whole way through, nodding carefully, gently correcting a small misunderstanding here, adding a layer of context there. And at the very end, when I had finished talking, she said something I have never stopped thinking about. She said, "Akal, the problem isn't that people don't know Islam. The problem is that they think they already do." I thought about the accounts I had once found so convincing online, people who had left the faith and now dedicated themselves to making others afraid of it. I thought about what it would look like if I, having left a church that had once hurt me, spent every single day producing content about how dangerous Christianity was, how absurd that would appear, how clearly rooted in something other than a search for truth. And yet that logic had never once occurred to me when the target was Islam. I had simply consumed it because I had been trained to accept it. I took my Shahada on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in October. There was no single dramatic moment, no lightning strike, no one conversation that collapsed everything at once and rebuilt it. It was the slow and steady accumulation of a year and a half of choosing, again and again, one day at a time, to look clearly at something I had once been carefully taught to look away from. It was the result of one woman who sat on a floor at 2 in the morning and made tea for someone who had once been afraid of her, and never once asked me to deserve that kindness first. Lina was there when I said the words. She held my hand. Afterwards, she looked at me and said simply, "I always knew you were looking for something real. I had been looking my whole life. I just hadn't known that the thing I had spent years fearing was the very thing that would finally, completely, give me peace."